Welcome to Normal Island. I'm Curtis Daly, and I'm joined by a very special guest who goes by the name of Rota Rota. Rota Rota is an
Hello, hello. How
activist
are
and
you?
commentator. How are you?
Good. I'm doing great tonight. How are you?
I'm very, very well. I've got my new blazer on. Have you guys been noticed that I've trying to sharpen up a little bit? I'm very excited to have you on. We're going to have a really, really interesting discussion. The stories are really, really big. Now, the stories we will be covering tonight. David Lammy backtracks on Labour's policy of ruling China's treatment of Uyghur Muslims as genocide. The Kamala Harris campaign seems to be losing steam. And extremist Israelis call for a Palestinian Holocaust. Now, there are only three stories tonight, as we will be focusing a little bit more time on our last story. Before we start the show, just make sure you leave a comment and engage in the conversation. And some of the comments will be read out, so please let us know your thoughts. If you haven't already, then please like the stream, as it does help the algorithm. Now, on to our first story. David Lammy has U-turned on ruling China's treatment of Uyghur Muslims as a genocide. Labour has backtracked on plans to push for formal recognition of China's treatment of the Uyghurs as genocide. In opposition, Labour backed a Commons motion that declared China's conduct all genocide and urged the government to seek formal recognition of this through the UN with other countries. Stephen Kinnock, then Shadow Asia Minister, said in 2021 that it was not enough to leave the matter to international courts because China would have to consent to an investigation. Now, what I find so unbelievably ironic about Kinnock's comment there, back in 2021, is that they never took this approach with Israel. Just as we have been saying for at least a year, Israel has been committing a genocide, we didn't need the ICC to declare it. Yet Labour did take this approach, but only with China. But with Israel, we have to defer to the courts. And even when the courts say, yeah, this is probably a genocide, Labour refused to acknowledge it and still use the line, Israel has a right to defend themselves. But they've now backtracked on China, which, it doesn't make sense. We understand that when it comes to Israel, politicians fall in line with the current established foreign policy of supporting Israel, no matter what, with pressure from the US and of course, Israel. But China are seen as adversaries to the West, which means that many Western nations didn't hesitate to call out the Uyghur genocide. So what on earth is the reason behind the change from David Lammy? Is the lives of people less important than trade? Rota, I really want to get your thoughts on this. Please, can you shine some light on this this backtracking?
I think honestly, it's a similar situation for a quite a strange reason at first thought. So the UK, when it has to deal with the United States vis-a-vis Israel or China vis-a-vis the Uyghur population, we have to think of the fact that it is not dealing with it as a peer or an equal. This is a superpower and an emerging superpower. And prior to Brexit, it was able to work through the EU to operate on that kind of eye level when it wanted to deal with things. And now, unfortunately, it has to go with hat in hand. And we've seen that the Keir Starmer government is really, really keen on investment. So foreign direct investment, especially for, very, very rich China, I believe they were talking about some sort of 11 billion pound investment. It was the number I saw quoted earlier today. This is big money, and that's what Keir is really all about. And that is the primacy thing. And when you say, does trade trump over people? Yes, unfortunately, a lot of the time, yes, that is indeed, unfortunately, what is happening. And the Keir Starmer government is being very normal, unfortunately, in that respect.
It kind of answered my next question, which was, I'll go into my question. It's basically, do you think that with the shift in global hegemonic powers, that the threats of China with the West feels, yes, okay, right, they put trade above people, but do you think it's because they kind of want to get involved in this new sort of geopolitical powers? Are they desperate to make closer connections with them economically? You say yes, but here's the thing: there are two ways we can approach China. Some say cooperation, some say a trade war. Now, of course, for me, and I'm sure yourself, a genocide is a genocide. It needs to be called out regardless of the nation, regardless of who our allies are, which obviously includes Israel and those who we potentially want to cooperate with. Um, I was going to say, what do you think is behind this? I mean, do you think David Lammy and Keir Starmer are thinking beyond just, oh, this is economically beneficial? Given that, I would say the powers that be, given that the Labour Party, as recently as 3 years ago, did say that this is a genocide, that they're maybe in the last couple of years, couple of months, they're taking a softer approach on China because we realise that maybe in 10 years, 15 years' time, the US may no longer be the superpower and, in fact, will be China.
I think when you were saying that, I was thinking in my head around this idea that David Lammy throws around of like progressive realism, and if
Mm.
we should just take them at their words, they're realists. So let's look at the situation in this idea. So there is a pretty high chance there will be some sort of conflict between the US and China, as we've seen with a lot of the movement around Taiwan lately, which is not great. Um, the calculation by David Lammy and Keir Starmer is probably how can we get a good economic deal out of China as much as possible in a very short amount of time in case something goes really, really poorly, but we'll still have the money. So at the end of the day, we'll come up. And that's really like the most realist way you can look at that situation is if there's like 50-50 chance, let's try and get as many billions of pounds in before everything turns around. And I think the reality at the end of the day is Britain, just like a lot of Europe, is highly dependent on the US as because it can't defend itself. That's just like a realistic thing right now. We're in a very dangerous geopolitical situation where we have two theaters of the world already kicking off in pretty expansive wars at this point. I mean, it's not just a genocide in Gaza. We're talking like an expansive regional war that's breaking out very slowly. And then Ukraine and Russia has been going into now the third year in a couple of months. Um, this is the real thing I think they're probably thinking about, and this allows they can put to the side human rights, they can put to the side whatever because they're thinking what's the best situation we can get in this situation. And I'm not agreeing with them. I'm just laying out the
Mm.
logic that I think
Oh, yeah,
I would
sure.
agree. I can see them going with.
I mean, it almost reeks of desperation here, though, because to me it feels like an admission that the current powers are falling. Of course, for us, that's been a long time happening. We went from the so-called heights of the British Empire. When I say heights, I don't mean morally high, but I mean economically. Of course, we were the powerhouse of the world, and over time. We have fallen from the so-called world stage. Some people also say that Brexit was the sort of death knell of the empire. But really, I mean, that's part of it, but mostly it's been the US over the last 50, 60 years, maybe longer actually, rising to prominence. But this move really does feel quite desperate because, and also to me, I mean, actually, I want to ask you this. Do you feel like that Britain no longer feels secure in the power of the US? Because let's be honest, we get our foreign policy from Washington. It's exactly when it comes to Israel. I mean, the reason why we're still defending Israel is because the US told us you're going to have to stick with Israel, and we do whatever they say. But it's strange that we're taking this approach when it comes to China. And it feels like to me that there's an acknowledgement that maybe we can't always rely on the US. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? It's an interesting dynamic.
I think I don't know. So like I would say like very sensible people in the Labour Party would say like the smart move geopolitically is the UK always has to go along with the US because that's just the deal. We're stuck in this defensive situation, and also we don't want to pay a ton of extra money for our military. And that's what a lot of countries are in, regardless of how you feel about the US or US imperialism. That's the deal a lot of countries have cut with the US. They provide the military, the country doesn't provide the military. And you saw in Brussels yesterday, I want to say 2 days ago, we had the big announcement of the 500 billion defense package. And while that sounds like a lot of money, that is not a lot of. This is over 10 years, so that actually is like 50 billion. That's not that much money when we're talking about building a continental-wide military force. And so even like at this extreme escalation in like the EU moving towards a defensive structure, it's still not paying the level of money it would need to replace the capabilities and capacities the US currently provides. And everyone, I would say, who has a couple of brain cells to rub together is of the appearance in 2016 that, oh man, like NATO is super unstable right now. And like, what would a rapid US pull out? They're also very aware that the Trump campaign has worked out three ways to it's like do a soft NATO withdrawal. So if you're not aware, there was a law passed in the U.S. I want to say like 2 years ago by the Congress that made it so that the president couldn't unilaterally withdraw from NATO. This was like basically an anti-Trump preventative measure. So he has, through the Heritage Foundation and a couple of other kind of Republican think tanks, thought up ideas of basically that you could like limit the actual engagement to either just the nuclear warheads or maybe just like the air and the nuclear shield. And even then, this would be a ridiculous withdrawal down. That's just the reality. We're talking like a huge shift in American power across the world. And this is whether like Trump or not, because we can talk about like, is the US in general kind of destabilizing, is able to like right itself to maintain its position, even like if everything kind of worked out for it. That's one thing. The other thing is like you have one of the political parties that has just decided that they're really keen on hyper isolationism, and that's very, very dangerous too, because yeah, I mean the whole defense structure of Europe can't change within a few months. It will literally take years to be able to replace some of these systems. But we're very realistically looking forward into a situation that has to change. And that's also in a situation where like there is no war in Taiwan. The things in Ukraine do not escalate. Stuff in Israel either stays at pace or lowers down, and things are still pretty bad then. Yeah, so like every country's in a bad situation. Britain's in a particularly bad one because it's out on its own, and because there's this weird trauma within like the political elite to not address Brexit when everyone knows like it's the issue at the moment, and especially on this like national security side of things. Um, this is a big problem. This is a major existential problem that a lot of countries have to answer. They're trying one way in Brussels. The UK is trying to figure out if it can keep with the US as long as possible, and also, I guess, triangulate a new position. Maybe figure. I don't know. It's you have to, if you don't believe your patron is with you, right? Like you're going to have to start working to find some other patrons. And for some reason, they don't want to go back to Brussels. They gotta hunt around, unfortunately.
I mean, it's really interesting about Donald Trump. I mean, he is, in a lot of ways, the establishment guy. He's a billionaire. He supports corporations, supports tax cuts for the very wealthy. But in another sort of wrinkle, he's also very anti-establishment when it comes to some foreign policy. I mean, he's very much US aligned when it comes to Israel. He is more pro-Israel than Kamala Harris, even though Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, that administration, is very, very pro-Israel. But yes, he has mentioned things such as NATO maybe pulling out. He's also talked about talking up Putin, Xi Jinping. So it's very interesting there, and that's in terms of the establishment are very scared of Trump. It's also very interesting again about how we are kind of on our own if we lose the US. Who is going to be our a big brother, a big partner that's going to save us all? It's all up in the air, and it's going to be very interesting to see in the next decade where the powers shift to.
Yeah.
Now, this is
One more
obviously
thing maybe to add to
go
that.
ahead,
I
sure.
think we also have to remember like Trump's tariff policy. Like he wants to slap 20%
Yes,
tariffs on
absolutely.
everything. So I mean, like I was very frustrated, and I made TikToks about this, about like labor's,
Mm.
going to placate the Trump campaign and stuff. But I think they're really trying to get a waiver out of that. I mean, that would be very bad for the UK and every other country. I mean, Trump too really wants to do some dangerous things for the global economy, for the US, like a lot of stuff, but like for stuff that'll hit us in a very direct way, it's not good. And honestly, it could lead to a financial crisis like very quickly.
Would you say potentially a bigger crisis than 2008?
That's complicated.
Mm.
I think it would be like, because it's like about slowing down the supply lines, it would be like if that boat was stuck in the dam or the Suez Canal forever. Like that's the effect. You know how like everything just basically ground to a halt, and then like the prices started just like doo, doo, doo. Yeah, I feel like it was to be that, but for years until Trump decided not to do it anymore. And that could be 4 years. That could be a very long or longer. Yeah.
Well, we're
Sorry.
talking about
Let's
Donald
go.
Trump. No, it's okay. I mean, we are talking about Trump, so it's very relevant to our next story, and that is the US election. Now, the US election seemed all but over when Joe Biden's cognitive abilities had deteriorated so much that it seemed like an easy ride for Donald Trump to the White House. However, after Biden dropped out and endorsed Kamala Harris, who became the nominee, fortunes for the Democratic Party sharply rose and the GOP began to panic. The campaign went off to a flying start, exciting the base with energy and decisions such as appointing Tim Walz as the VP pick. It seemed as if it was over for Trump. But since then, there have been many instances from Team Harris that shows they may now be undermining their own campaign. The campaign has decided to gloat about how many Republicans have been endorsing Harris, and they've certainly pivoted from a more progressive style campaign to a more careful centrist tone, going from strong rhetoric such as workers' rights and supporting unions to campaign slogans such as country before party, something Keir Starmer couldn't stop himself saying in the 2024 election. Now, I covered a story a while back where Labour right figures such as John Ashworth, we all know who he is because he's never off our TV boxes, him and many others of Labour together flew over to the US to help with the campaign. It has recently been revealed that the Democrats have actually taken advice from those that gave Labour a lower vote share, not just from 2017, but 2019, and a man who lost his seat to an independent. It has also been revealed that Labour together advised the Dems to be more hardline on immigration and to stop being so supportive of trans people. John Ashworth, chief executive of Labour Together and a former frontbencher under Starmer until we lost a seat to a pro-Palestinian candidate in the biggest shock of the election, was also at the DNC in Chicago in August. He urged the Harris campaign not to hide from issues voters care about that the left normally finds difficult to address, such as illegal immigration. Labour also sought to neutralise talking points the right could weaponise. Ashworth warns his US comrades to develop solid responses on transgender issues after Labour colleagues faced repeated media questions about whether women can have penises. One of the things I was raising in Chicago was how that would become an issue if they weren't careful, Ashworth said. Now, we can see how the shift in the style of the campaign, went from being aggressive on the GOP, leaning into progressive messaging to a more centre-right approach. And that's already having a negative effect on polling.
What is with all of this bedwetting among Democrats? Maybe it's an eternal problem, but let's take a look here. These are, of course, the Great Lake battleground states, the states we've been focusing in on. If Kamala Harris wins these three, she most likely gets to 270 electoral votes. Take a look 3 weeks ago. Harris was ahead by 2 in Pennsylvania, 2 in Wisconsin, 3 in Michigan. Look at where we are today. The race is even tighter than it was. Today, it's a 1-point advantage in Pennsylvania, 1 in Wisconsin, 1 in Michigan. Look, that's limited movement. But in a year in which this race has been so static, if we're talking 1-point movement, 1-point movement, 2-point movements, and we see movements in all three, this is the type of thing that, at least in the public polling, makes Democrats worried. And I think that the public polling in this case is reflected in some of that internal polling, some of that reporting that suggests that these Great Lake battleground states have certainly tightened a lot, where at this point they are way too close to.
Now, finally, and probably the biggest mistake of the campaign, Kamala Harris, who at least in terms of rhetoric sounded marginally better than Joe Biden on the issue of Palestine at the beginning of her campaign, has shifted to the default position of standing by Israel no matter what. Now we have an example of this here. This is a clip of Harris responding to a question about whether the campaign is undermining its support for Arab Americans and Muslims.
How risky is it that you could lose the election?
Well, it is undeniable that it is something that everyone is aware of what is happening there. I speak publicly all the time about the fact that there are so many tragic stories coming from Gaza, and of course the first in this phase of everything that has happened, the first most tragic story is October 7th. And what happened that day, and then what has happened since. And I think what's critically important as we look at this moment is, one, acknowledging the tragedy of what has happened in Gaza in terms of the extraordinary number of innocent Palestinians who have been killed, and taking that seriously and speaking truth about that. In addition, of course, to what I said about what happened on October 7 in terms of 1,200 innocent Israelis being slaughtered, women being horribly raped.
Now you can see the shocking double standard there. The question was on Palestine, and her response is, well, the number one issue, the most important thing is October 7th. Now, many people cite the figure 1,200 people were killed. Right. Well, I mean, 700 of them, some say, are civilians. We do know that Israel killed their own, including civilians and soldiers, using the Hannibal Directive. Newspapers such as Haaretz have reported on that. But again, you know, she's completely ignoring the north of 100,000 Palestinians that have been killed. She's also peddling the rape myth. Now, no one here is suggesting that no one committed rape on October 7th. However, we still have a lack of evidence for it, but we also have evidence for Israelis committing rape against Palestinians. There's even video footage, and they celebrated it. So, again, double standard. Rota, is Harris completely destroying her own campaign? I really want to get your thoughts on this.
I think this is complicated because I think honestly apart from outside of certain communities, the Gaza issue is not top end. Unfortunately, what's polling in a opinion poll after opinion poll is like basic economics facts. And honestly, the biggest policy I would say that like is polling well for Kamala is like they want to extend Medicaid to have like in-home what's the word, care workers
policy,
and stuff.
by the way.
Yeah, so like really, yeah, great policy. But okay, so this isn't a normal election because unfortunately Donald Trump is running again. And the big problem with this is they do not talk about the election like a normal election would be talked. There are no issues, conversations. It's just about like vibes. It's all vibes. And because of this, that means the conversation and every part of the election and the election itself will unfortunately be decided on vibes. And so even if Kamala came out with like all the greatest policies that you and I would ever love, it wouldn't really matter. And that it's very frustrating, I would say, as someone who cares about like good governance and policy. But because I would say like she changed the vibes of her campaign, and this is coming back hard on her. And because Trump is doing like ridiculous stunts on the day and the news can't stop themselves from talking about it. I mean, like they've covered the McDonald's thing for a full 24 hours and it was like a completely staged event, which is so hilarious. But she did like 5 rallies, all like heavy duty on policy. It's not going to go anywhere. And unfortunately, this is kind of the Hillary campaign in like many like aesthetic ways, not in like an exact way, because she's doing much better and there's a better ground game, and I don't want to put that much like shade on the campaign. They're doing like significantly better, but it's narratively falling into this like idea that like Trump is getting to do fun clown things, and that's good TV, and it is. And then she goes and does normal politician things and is unfortunately criticized for that. And then there is a very big real problem, which is a Gazan genocide happening right in the background. And unfortunately, a lot of people are seeing that also next to like weird Trump stuff. And that takes up all the space in a lot of people's heads. And this is all very dangerous for a campaign that's, you know, like basically 50-50 at the moment. And this is not very good. The other problem is it's like Democrats have to overperform in every single election because of gerrymandering and other quirks of the wonderful electoral college that was designed by the founders. This creates a major problem in like everywhere, basically, because if she doesn't have overperformance in all of the demographic groups they usually get good overperformance in, then she'll be hit. And this is where Gaza comes in, because a few voters in a few places could really flip the entire election. And that is incredibly dangerous. And I think also, her not addressing the issue very well, or like the White House, Joe Biden, unfortunately, at the end of the day, Joe Biden's still the president, and that's like the reality of the thing. Kamala could change her mind on this, and nothing would change if Joe Biden didn't want to do it. The other major issue is we have people who've become so frustrated because of Gaza that they want to basically, I've seen a lot of people discussing the idea that like America should suffer because not stopping the genocide, and that they should accelerate the situation. And unfortunately, they're falling into accelerationist lines of thinking, or even endorsing like voting Trump. And these are like really wild positions, but they either want to punish the Democrats, or they think like the people of the country should have to suffer in a way because of like penance. And I think this is an incredibly dangerous position, because Trump is incredibly worse on just Gaza, if that is the only issue you care about. He is bad on every other issue if you care about more than one thing. And that is, I think that's what has given me a lot of fear, because I do not see Kamala coming and fixing her stance on Gaza. And like, I can understand you watching that video, but for me, I just watched every politician give every both sides position on Israel Gaza since I was born. They're always like, oh yeah, this is thing, and then also this. And have I spoken the exact same amount of time for both of these? Cool, good. Let's go to the next question. And that's I've seen this my entire life. That was the most bland response and normal response, unfortunately, that you see to every tragedy since my entire lifetime in Gaza. And that unfortunately sucks a lot. But that was probably the most normal part of the election, was watching that video right there, and that very vanilla response. So yeah.
I mean, I wanted to discuss about obviously the threat of Trump and maybe the threat of Jill Stein, right, in a second. But I want to come back to the first thing you said, which is that the issue of Gaza only appeals to a certain amount of people, and that's not essentially what you're saying. That's not an election decider. So, what, in your view,
in Michigan, it is an election decider. Other places, I don't think so.
Okay. Okay, then what would you say was the real shift in sort of the campaign for Harris? I mean, I agree with you that it's not a policy-led campaign. Of course it isn't. Ask most people what their policies are. It's not. It's about Trump going to McDonald's or whatever. It's about, did Kamala Harris work at McDonald's? I understand that, but at the beginning of her campaign, there was a lot of energy from Harris, and I feel like you need to excite your base to generate that sort of energy. And when she was talking about, more progressive ideas, when she was talking about workers' rights and unions, when she was putting Tim Walz everywhere, and he was doing his amazing union speeches, okay, that policy may not filter through to the entire electorate, but what it will do is sort of give activists on the ground that energy. It seems like the energy is gone. So I do personally think that maybe policy has something to do with it, but I'd like to get your insights on what you think the main thing is, which has shifted from sort of early campaign Harris to now, which is why it's looking a lot tighter than it is. Or do you think it's actually mostly on Trump's side and Harris hasn't done, quote unquote, that much wrong?
I don't even think it's that, like, because she's still doing like right before, like, an hour or two ago, like, I watched like Waltz on the Daily Show from last night, and then like one of their rallies, and like they're doing all the same stuff, like it's the same rally. And I mean, like, and also they're like really about their stump speeches, so it's very much the same rally.
True.
But I don't know, maybe it's just doing a normal thing really well is not as cool as Donald Trump. I know it sounds stupid, but that's the only way I can wrap my head around it, because it's like the policies have not changed. Like the same stuff that was on her website when you and I were like amped in those first like couple of weeks. I think a couple of things. So like one is like she couldn't let Gaza couldn't hang forever. We couldn't get a non-answer forever. People got pissy, and that like there was a little honeymoon, and that also was like during the newness of it. That ended and pretty quick. I mean, like the advancement into Lebanon has really shifted things like a lot, because even if you didn't care about Palestinians, you might know a Lebanese person. And yeah. So that I think has like dramatically shifted things around quite a lot. But at the other side, I would say there's more of a kind of feeling that the establishment Democratic kind of campaign committees have like lurched into action. Places like Center for American Progress and kind of like the Neera Tanden crowd, and they're a lot more conservative and dull on their approach to politics. I don't know. It just felt like it was very spontaneous at the beginning, but that it was also because it literally was spontaneous. So it's like it's very hard to. It's not a normal campaign either. It's like a very short campaign, so it's very hard to say. Yeah, I don't have a good answer there.
I can almost see as well that there's a shift on the Republican side, because there's been multiple shifts actually. The first shift was Joe Biden dropping out, and it looked very good for Trump at the time. Joe Biden was not a viable candidate. When he dropped out and Kamala Harris took over, that was very good for the Democrats. And for a while, you essentially had the GOP just whining. Trump literally saying on TV, this is not fair, essentially. And it made him look bad. So I think they've shifted from, okay, let's stop whining about Joe Biden dropping out. It's not that they've let it go, and have focused more on just actually campaigning. I feel like there has been a shift there on the Republican side too.
Yeah. Also, I think I was looking at some polling data the other day for like likability scores across Vance and Trump and Walz and Kamala. So on October 2nd, almost exactly the date of the vice presidential debate, you see a dramatic uptick in Vance's likability, and it continues to ride up. It's still real negative, like people aren't loving him, but it's gone up by 10%. And I would say, like, if there was like one major screw up, it was normalizing him and Walz being, unfortunately, a good human and not being mean to the person in front of them. Yeah, and then they really kind of dropped stuff like the Weird campaign because they wanted to appeal to Republicans. So you can't. I understand on like a logical level, you can't call Republicans weird and also say, could you please also vote for me? It's a little disingenuous, but that was also part of the firing up the base, because you had kind of like the openness to actually go and say, yeah, everyone kind of like, Republicans are crazy. Like, they're wild. They're out of their heads. Like, they're so strange with these, wild and weird beliefs. And then it kind of became more, you can't say that as much anymore. And that I think was a big mess up, because if you're fighting a meme war, you need to fight in the meme wars. You can't not.
Okay, so let's talk about the threat from Jill Stein, or even if you see it as a threat. I mean, there are many people who are so angry, justifiably, at the Democrats for their position on Gaza, on their position on all foreign policy, to be honest, and that anger is completely justified. But there is a question now: do you back the Democrats, even though they're complicit in the genocide, or do you back someone like Jill Stein, who has been saying all the right things? Now, there are people like Mehdi Hassan, someone I really respect. I think he's consistent. He says, at the end of the day, there's only going to be one person president. And I'm inclined to agree. Now, for me, my position is very different to the UK. In the UK, we have a parliamentary system. It's very different. We don't, of course, we only have one governing party, but it's made up of seats. If there's a safe seat in my area, one seat goes one way, it doesn't really matter. You got the electoral college in the US, though. If one state goes one way, I mean, the elections are usually down to a handful of states. And the second reason is, in the UK, the Conservative Party and the Labour Party are virtually identical. Whereas, okay, maybe on foreign policy, the Dems and the GOP are similar, but when it comes to domestic policy, they could be more different. And the threat from Trump in 2025, it's literally Christian fascism. So I want to get your take on that angle and what you would say to leftists. First of all, would you agree if they want to abandon the Democrats to vote for the Greens? What's your view on that?
Okay, so like to go from like the top end of this, Jill Stein is not even registered in every single state. It is mathematically impossible for her to win. That's just like baseline. The only reason you'd be voting for Jill Stein is if you're trying to make her reach like the 5% threshold so she can get some federal funding. So you're really just trying to subsidize the Green Party at that point. And if that's where you want to spend the next 4 years of your activism building that up as a national organization, like, go for it. Like, if that's like your real goal in political activism. Otherwise, there is literally no reason to vote for her, because voting for her will not alter the course of events. It will only, like in a realistic way, like if she wins one state, it'll only dramatically shift the vote share. Like that's it. She won't win. Like we don't have that system. I also think it's important to remember the president has a lot of incredible unilateral power. It is, like Curtis said, it is not a parliamentary system. They get to appoint the heads of all of the agencies. They get to appoint, nominate all the judges. They get to do a bunch of wild stuff like the military. They get to do effectively have carte blanche on foreign policy. These are major things that you would not want to be handing back over to Donald Trump. And the kind of argument that I've seen a lot, which is like, well, we survived Trump one time. Why would you make that gamble again? That is like Russian roulette for politics. It's like, what could happen in the next 4 years? A lot. An infinite amount of time is 4 years. I think also like Jill Stein for me, I've seen Jill Stein run for election since I was a child. She is a perennial election runner, and we have not seen the Green Party do much of anything in that time period. I'm all for like the US to ditch the electoral college, have a popular vote system, have proportional representation, like all the bells and whistles. Like that's where I'm at. This all requires constitutional changes. We also need to do this at the state and local level. This is also a major shift. This is a massive political project that has to get done. And also, in addition, there needs to be a national party set up to do left-wing politics, to do progressive politics that has a lot of money, a lot of members, a lot of institutions, and nationwide. In a massive country with hundreds of millions of people, that's what you have to do. Or you do some sort of like what like the DSA is kind of doing, where they're like kind of operating like labor in the cooperative party, but that's complicated. But like if you really want to set up a third party, you need to really plan this out. And I think like at the end of the day, there are 2 weeks left. That's where we're at. There's 2 weeks. In those 2 weeks, you're not setting up a socialist party. You're not able to get on the ballot. Like we're locked in, unfortunately. What you do have is 4 years to figure out things for next time. A little less than that if you actually run a candidate, like 2.5. That gives you time. Do you want to do that under Kamala Harris and a disappointing Democratic government? Or do you want to do it under Donald Trump, who wants to put leftists in concentration camps? He says this quite often at his rallies. I'm not making this up. So like it's like a very simple thing. It's a lot easier to organize under the Harris government, potential Harris government, than any Donald Trump government. And that's where you have to be at, because you're going to end up with a bad situation. You can steer it one way, and one of those is infinitely worse and more dangerous to minorities, to immigrants, to queer people, to so many groups that they are very serious about either purging from the country or doing mass deportations and huge camp systems. And unfortunately, like this is the reality of unfortunately where we're at. I get very scared when I see kind of and maybe I'll like show my cards here. Like I grew up in the South, like in the deep South, and being a leftist in the deep South is not fun, as you can imagine. And seeing a lot of like influencers, leftists, but from like really left-wing blue states that never have had to think about not having a democratic government ever. And they're like, yeah, the moral thing to do where you're like not responsible for anything the government does is like not vote, or like vote for blah, 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 or do. And I'm like, no, that's not how it works in a democracy. Like you don't get to morally check out because like your person didn't win or whatever. Like you're still in it. That's how a democracy works. We're all responsible for everything in it, whether we did it or not, or whether we liked it or not. That's just part of the deal of being in a democracy. And you don't get to check out. You just get to make choices, and some of them are crappy. And that's a lot of democracy, unfortunately. But you can figure out better options for next time. You can organize, you can plan, you can strategize, you can build up the left wing that can exist. Like Bernie Sanders back in 2016 proved it's not completely taboo. We can raise a ton of money. We can run a major candidate. We can do stuff. People think it's controversial, like AOC or whatever. Like, she's like really powerful in that party now. Like it is wild to see a socialist there, like of any kind, in like that level of like party leadership position. Like people do not understand, like 20 years ago, you could not talk about these kind of politics in public. Now things are different, and people are seeing there's a big movement towards in America that is different. Unfortunately, the fascists are much more organized in achieving their revolutionary goals, and we are not. We are way behind, and unfortunately, highly under resourced. So you go. I've been talking a long time.
Well, I mean, I was going to say there are some people who say, I know Jill Stein's not going to win. The goal isn't for her to become president. We know that the goal is to move the dial, and it's to hurt the Democrats. It's not an accelerationist argument. The accelerationist argument is like, no, we actually want Trump to win to break the system. I remember so many people saying that back in 2016. Absolutely, it's not good. I mean, we even know when it comes to political psychology that people don't move left wing when the government moves right wing. In fact, they move right wing with it. They, in times of instability and crisis, they become more authoritarian. They look to states and like a paternal sort of government that wants to clamp down on people's freedoms, and it's a very messed up way, but that's what happens. People don't suddenly become more revolutionary left wing. So that's one thing. But to those that say, okay, I'm not an accelerationist, but we are only going to enable the two-party system, how are we ever going to break out this cycle and the genocide keeps happening? Or when it comes to neoliberal economic policy, if we keep voting for the same guys? I think that's again, an argument I necessarily agree with in the US. I do agree with it in the UK, but it's a far more convincing argument than some saying, oh, I think Jill Stein's going to win. So I do want to get your response to that one as well.
You got to put up new guys. Like that's the thing. Like whether it's within the Democratic Party or in a different party, you got to be able to put up those guys. We did not put up the guys. The guys don't exist. Like that's the problem. And it's very fundamental, basic politics. Like there's the American left movement is in this moment where a lot of people are hitting class consciousness. It's been kicking around for a few years now. We've had some electoral successes in local and state levels, and have some people in Congress, and this is all super cool. But this is like a teeny tiny little faction of like ideologies, a bunch of different ones, basically as a part of another very well established party. It's a very small amount of political power at this moment in time, and a very small amount of resources that have been really mustered. This is not a national movement that can really evoke change yet, but it can be very quickly. We just have to organize in that level. And as I said before, it's like if we want to be able to have different options in the presidential election, we need to make those options exist. And if you're trying to hurt the Democratic Party or hurt Joe Biden or hurt Kamala Harris, you are not going to, because they are rich and already successful people. You're just going to hurt yourself and probably a lot of your neighbors. So there's no real benefit to that. Also, keep in mind, Joe Biden's not running, so we're not even voting over him. Most of the things you're really frustrated about, he's the endpoint decider of all those things, unfortunately. So even if you wanted to kind of like personally annoy him, it's not on the table at the moment. Yeah, I mean, it sucks, but I think the US, I'm very optimistic about the American left. People are getting back into trade unionism, which I think is one of the main avenues to build out a lot of political power really, really quickly in the US. I think also there is the wonderful situation that there's infinite elections in the US. So there's always more options to throw people up literally every year in most states. And I think that's where people have to be at. It's a matter of, and this is how I deal with every election. So I figure out like which candidate I like, I don't hate the most, or I'll hate the least rather, or I think will be like a stable hand for that moment. Because, growing up in the South, you wouldn't get really great options. You'd have to just pick the best, worst one. And I know it's like lesser evilism, but this is more like you have 12 candidates and you have to pick from 12 lesser evils. But then I, vote for one of them, and then the next day you go back to protesting them and trying to push them or trying to like shift the government or remove them from power, because that's like how you have to play the game of democracy. It doesn't end. The elections are literally just like demarcation points that reset where the power is split up, and then whether that's 2-4 years later, you get another reset. And what you do in that middle period between those two elections, that's the most important part of the politics. That's when you find the new candidates, build the campaigns, build the movements, build the parties, raise the money, blah blah blah, all this stuff. And it is not like, I think a lot of people are also taking the idea that, okay, Kamala and the Democrats haven't moved on Palestine. They're just stuck at this kind of like general ceasefire position. And this is deeply frustrating, and they view this as tied with like the US election. So like if they don't change their position by the election, it's all for nothing. But no, literally, the Gazans will need you every single day after that, and will continue needing you to advocate for them. And will need you to continue advocating past even the Harris presidency or the Trump presidency. These are all situations that will not be addressed in any short amount of time. Even if there was a today ceasefire, we need to have years of rebuilding, literally decades of counseling for children that are having, psychological traumas that like we think we understand because we've seen some horrible images on the phone, but these are like fractions of what is actually occurring. Yeah,
I mean, I would
I
say
mean,
my
it's just you can't view
yeah.
elections as the only thing that is matters in politics.
Mm.
It doesn't. It's just like a day. It's a day, power shifts up, and then you have to keep going to do more politics. Um, yeah, I mean, it's really just like a checkpoint. It tells you where you're at in that round. And that's why, that's why they even call them cycles, like election cycles. It's just like it turns and you got to keep fighting and go it again. And it's hard and it's really, if you've been in politics and political activism a long time, it grinds you down, especially if you're doing party work. It just like it destroys your soul for many reasons, but it it is the work of politics, and it is why is it so important that so many people get involved, because then the work is spread out and the grinding of the soul is also spread out. And a lot of this is unglamorous. It's like campaigning and knocking on doors and picking up phones for like hours and just like sitting through infinite meetings where you're like disagreeing over like whether you want to use one phrasing or another phrasing, or like the ideological like implications of blah blah blah. But that's the hard work, and that I think is it's getting out of just the digital spaces. It's building up actual communities. It's doing the local organizing, the regional organizing, the national organizing, and it is the hard work of building up a left-wing party in the United States, which I totally believe is possible. But just like the parties that are doing stuff right now have been trying to hustle these positions for a long time. They haven't gone anywhere. It isn't, unless you really, really believe one of them can make a change and you want to dedicate a ton of your time into it and a bunch of your friends' time into it, don't do plans which you feel will actually achieve things, whether that's a small campaign in your local area or a big national thing. A lot of the big things that are happening to you are on the state and local level and in any of your countries, and some random counselor is screwing with your life in some very stupid and specific way. And that's a lot of politics, and we've seen that in the last few years. Like the conservatives are really good at using stuff like school board meetings and all these other like teeny tiny positions to really wreak havoc on people's lives, their health, their education, all the basic parts of what makes life life. And so that is, I think, really important. You need to go run for something. You need to be out there. You need to get your friends organized. If you're all pissed off about stuff, you're already halfway there. You just got to go get organized and start actively doing stuff.
Yeah.
And there, even if like an NGO is not overtly like in your political wing of stuff, but you feel like they're doing cool work, that's a good space to go do politics in. Don't go in there and like the first day being like, oh, like heavy duty, like doom and gloom, or like hit them with like, like, what kind of Marxist are you? Unless that's the vibe, then that's like cool. But like otherwise, like be normal, build up friendships, and then like they will start thinking like, oh, this guy's like cool. He's like a socialist, blah blah blah. Like there
But
is opportunity.
I'd say, I mean, for me, I mean, my final comments on this would be that you can't. You're very passionate. I like that. You can't vote away a genocide, but you can vote to protect the women's right to choose. You can protect LGBTQ protections, even when it comes to wages and the economy. These things you can make a marginal difference. So I think when people say there's literally no difference, yes, maybe on foreign policy, but there's still utility in it. Now, we should move on because we have one more story to cover, and it's a very big one. But before we get onto that story, I just want to say, if you're enjoying the show so far, then make sure you hit that like button. It's just a little click. It helps with the algorithm. And if you haven't already, please consider becoming a subscriber and share our content widely. We are still a voluntary organisation where our goal is to become a full-time socialist media organisation without having to navigate with our current jobs. This means we can be more consistent, our amount of content will increase, and the nature of it will be far more ambitious with higher production quality. So, if you can, then please head over to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support. There you can support us either monthly or any one-off donation. Thank you. Now, before we get into our last story, I do want to quickly scan through our comments because some of you have made a contribution. Let's take a look. Simon Lee, organise, educate, agitate. Very easy. I mean, you summed up Rota's words there. Politics doesn't start and end at the ballot box. That's a very small part of it. It's the organising, which is why I think you should organise. It'd be better organised under Harris than Trump. Let's go to another one. Les Watts, you've got to build from the bottom up. If you vote Dems or reptiles, you just get two sides of the same coin. You need to stop rewarding the Dems. They're the boss's party. They're not left wing. All what you're saying is completely true, But then why would you then start again from afresh? I mean, I understand that you feel like the Democratic Party can't be reformed. Maybe it can't. But, okay, I'll give you an example in the UK context, right? Why was it that Jeremy Corbyn became so prominent in UK politics? Why do we all get so excited by it? It's because he was a member of the Labour Party and was the leader of the Labour Party. If he was leader of the Green Party, no one would care. Not really anywhere, apart from us small political nerds would care, but the wider electorate would care. You wouldn't get hundreds of thousands of people join the party because guess what? The Greens are already fairly left-wing. They share a lot of his policies. The reason why there was excitement, because there was a realistic goal that Jeremy Corbyn could become Prime Minister. So it does matter attaching yourself to already established parties. I don't think completely abandoning the big parties in the US context could work in a presidential system. Again, the context is very, very different to the UK. But that was the example I brought up. People were excited by Jeremy Corbyn because they felt there was a realistic alternative. Let's go to another one. Sarah Jessica Fata, good to see you again. I would laugh every single time I see your name. If she loses, Palestinian supporters will get blamed anyway, regardless of the reality. I mean, maybe, possibly, but I still think that if you should vote for harm reduction. I don't think it changes the nature of the argument in any way. Dylan, AOC a socialist? My ass, this guy is taking the piss. Rota, actually, I'll let you, because you were referenced, I'll let you come back on that one. AOC a socialist? You must be wrong.
Guys, there's a lot of kinds of socialists, and I think you have to understand that the American political system is very right-wing. So, this is a political system where Kamala is called, like, Joseph Stalin. So, like, I don't even know what AOC would be in the minds of like right-wingers like now. And I think you have to remember, this is a country, like if you're from, like the UK or anywhere in Europe, you are like 1,000 years in the future on social development. So like the things that AOC or Sanders pitches or Omar or like any of the more lefty members, they're like really left-wing within like what is acceptable in American electoral politics, and they are the most left-wing politicians that have ever been elected to those positions.
Good point. Kalmak MCC, Mehdi Hassan said they are both pro-genocide, then listed why to vote for Harris. What the fuck is that? Well, I mean, I'm just going to reiterate his point, which is that yes, both are genocide supporters. That is absolutely true. Donald Trump is worse on Israel. I mean, this motherfucker would try and build a shopping mall in the middle of Gaza if he could, and probably would with Netanyahu. Also, Trump is Netanyahu's preferred candidate. That tells you all you need to know. But again, it's about harm reduction. If you want to protect your queer comrades, if you want to protect those who give birth, and you don't want Project 2025 stopping people from having abortion and they're forced to come to term even in cases of rape, then it's still a salient argument to vote for the lesser evil, and that is all Mehdi is saying. You can obviously disagree and think it's wrong, but you can't say it's not that logical. I think it's the most logical argument out there. I believe that is all for our comments. Let's go on to our final story of the evening. On Sunday, a conference was held on the southern border of Israel called Preparing to Resettle Gaza. Now, the conference name is a pretty big giveaway of the nature of what was discussed, but of course we will go into more detail. Hundreds of people gathered on Israel's southern border for a 2-day celebratory conference titled Preparing to Resettle Gaza. Throughout the events, participants heard from far-right politicians and leaders of the settlement movement, all of whom proclaims their shared vision for the future, re-establishing a Jewish presence in the Gaza Strip. Every sliver of it, as one speaker declared. The conference was put together by Nahala, an extremist settler organization headed by controversial leader Daniela Weiss, who moved through Monday's crowd like a venerated celebrity, stopping to shake hands and pose for photos. Weiss spoke several times throughout the day, including in English to the foreign press. In an impassioned speech, she vowed to make She vowed to make good on her promise to resettle Gaza within a year. Now we have a clip of her, and she doesn't hide her extremist language.
So we plan to take what we acquired in the years of settling today in Samaria and to do the same thing here in Gaza. I want to tell you now, that in less than a year, each one of you can call me and ask me, did you succeed in fulfilling your dream? And the answer will be, yes, actually, you don't have to call me, because you will witness how Jews go to Gaza and Arabs disappear from Gaza.
Arabs will disappear from Gaza. Now, this language is widespread across the conference. One person who attended also did not mince her words. Reshit has come with her friends. She is the daughter of an Israeli soldier who spent months in Gaza and is now fighting in Lebanon. She is friendly, open, eloquent, and utterly sure of herself. So why would you want to live in Gaza? Because it's our homeland, she replies. It says in the Torah that this is our home, this is our land, and we have every right to live there. What, I ask, about the Palestinians who already live in Gaza? What should happen to them? She doesn't miss a beat. We should kill them, every last one of them. And if the government won't do that, then we should just kick them out. This is our land, and we deserve it. You could not get more extreme than that. Among one of the speakers was National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, who is probably one of the most extreme politicians out of the entire government. He said this: what we have learned this year is that everything is in our hands. We are the owners of this land. Yes, we experienced a terrible catastrophe on October 7th, but what we need to understand 1 year later is that so many Israelis have changed their thinking. They have changed their mindset. They understand that when Israel acts like the rightful owners of this land, this is what brings results. I see it in the terrorist jail cells. We took away their jelly sandwiches. We took away their chocolate. We took their TV sets and their ping pong tables and their exercise time. You should see them whining and crying in their cells. And that is our proof. When we decide we can, we succeed. Now, Netanyahu has come out and said he doesn't believe in resettling Gaza. Of course, none of us believe him, but given the fact that many government ministers were at the conference, then it's clear it's a shared goal of his. Rota, look, I almost don't know what to say at this point. I mean, here at Turn Left, we unpack statements made by politicians, organisations, and provide the real message behind them. We call bullshit on statements such as, oh, Israel is just defending themselves, they're just trying to stop terrorism, and we say, no, you're obviously trying to expand settlements and completely take over Palestine. Well, here, they're literally just saying it. They aren't ashamed. So I don't even really know what to ask you apart from, what is your response?
You know, I don't like to describe people as ontologically evil, but like, Ben-Gvir is one evil motherfucker. Like, oh my God, like that, the stuff with the prisoners, what is going on? Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, we all know the settlers are way out there. You know, they come from this messianic movement, and it is all about prophecy and biblical realism and all these kind of end times prophecies and all this other nonsense. And this is very dangerous. It's been very dangerous a really long time. We know, unfortunately, that there is so much money being pumped into this settler movement, not just from, right-wing Israelis, but also from people in the US, especially the evangelical community. It's also just, when you see the photos of the conference, you also see how like absurd the entire thing is, because it is effectively a real estate conference. We're watching a very bizarre real estate conference that just has a side of ethnic cleansing to it. It's fundamentally just it just makes you think of this like banality of evil kind of idea. The fact that these things are so absurd and cruel, but also just so hilariously ridiculous at the same time, because it's a mundane thing. It's like, oh, well, we'll build a nice resort here. Think of the communities and the families that could move in. Look at this subdivision. Look at this model family home. But we're also talking about a place that has a current war going on, and they're just fantasizing about, won't it be lovely when everyone's gone? It's It's very, like I said, it's this idea of prophecy mixed with the mundaneness of real estate and capitalism, and tied into religious fervor, and it's all, it's truly creates an alienation, I think, from what you consider what should be normal, and what is unfortunately very real, and happens unfortunately more commonly, we see.
And I think you're right when you describe it as the banality of evil, because in that excerpt from that article, the writer, I believe it's from The Guardian, the writer said that, well, the woman he approached was very lovely, very nice, very sure of herself, confident. And then she says, kill all Palestinians. And I think that's, a lot of these politicians are comically evil. But you have people, I mean, I don't think she was a politician. She was just a daughter of a soldier. And, she comes across really, really sweet and then says the most extreme thing. And that's the point. It is the banality of evil. I mean, you also hit the nail on the head. It's like a real estate conference rather than ethnic cleansing. That's just on the side of it because it's so nonchalant. It's not thought about. And that's what makes the evil more pervasive and it makes it worse and more widespread. Now, this is a so-called fringe event held by extremists. But the problem here is that this is entirely mainstream. Look, we have far-right activity in our country. Even though I believe our government is pretty ineffective in tackling them, it's safe to assume that the politics of the fascists, those that took part in the race riots, isn't the mainstream of this country. But when Netanyahu turns around and says, I have nothing to do with this, I mean, that's a complete lie. The attitude of extreme Zionism is very pervasive. It's widely shared in Israeli society. And of course, my producer just told me actually that 1/3 of the government or government ministers was there. So it's a feeling across Israeli society and not just a fringe group, isn't it?
I think this is a complicated question, right? So like on one level you have Likud. So this is like a right-wing party, but it's like a right-wing party because there's already another normal like center lefty or center right party. It shows how the electoral like far right, which we will say is Likud in this scenario, works with the far right extremists, the non-electoral far right. These are the settlers. And how these two have a relationship with each other. And that, sorry, I'm trying to figure out where I am with the camera too. They have a relationship with each other, right? So there's this electoral end that gives them actual state power and the ability to do things within the strictures of the law, even though those are very flexible when you are the person also governing. But there's still limitations on what, for example, Ben-Gvir could do, or any of the other ministers from the far right. It is also very useful to them to have a big and thriving paramilitary organization, just like all far-right movements have saw the benefit of having a extra legal paramilitary organization. Because at the end of the day, yeah, maybe actually, what if all the countries in the world get their shit together? What if there's a bunch of international push to have like a complete weapons embargo? The IADF is forced to stand down. All the stuff works out in the best way you and I could imagine, in the most realistic way, right? Doesn't matter because a paramilitary force can go out there and still shoot people. And because the guy who runs the prisons and several other ministers, they could just slow roll those prosecutions to the point that they never happen. So like this is the very clever ability. And we see this also with the riots, right? We see the electoral hand of the far right in Nigel Farage and Reform. And then we see the extra legal paramilitaries personified in Tommy Robinson, what's his name, Yaxley Lennon,
Stephen Yaxley Lennon.
Yaxley Lennon. I have to use his Tory name, not his his silly right wing one. But like this is also the similar kind of thing. The Proud Boys, Donald Trump. These movements are very important, and they depend upon this extreme right to be able to push issues that they can't touch, and also to literally go after their political opponents. This is what is so dangerous about far right politics everywhere, because it's not just playing the game within the rules of how we're all agreeing to play the game. It's playing that game and then also playing a completely different game that no one else is playing, or not that many people are playing. And that is a very, very, very big problem. I mean, Israel has a problem of paramilitaries, and it has a lot of weapons. It has it has a military population of almost the entire adult population. Like these are all very bad recipes to have something poorly go. Um, I also think, like, going back to what we were saying earlier, it made me think a lot of so I have this book that I love. It's called Austria, Habsburg to Hitler, and it follows from like the end of the First World War, the Austrian Revolution, through to the end of the Second World War. And right after the First World War happened, there was major starvation because all the supply lines were broken up. All these countries had to collapse. People were starving in the masses. But also in the situation of Austria, it had never been a country before. It was a feudal possession, just a small part of it. And then every other part was governed as effectively a sovereign entity within an empire. So the different states would just not send food to people on the other side of the border. And very quickly, through hunger, people realized what they were willing to do and let people literally in the next town over starve to death. And that happened very quickly in a very extreme situation. But this is one of the main dangers of crisis, and also the main dangers of the far right, because their goal is to normalize violence to the point where they can convince a significant portion of the population to kill another part of the population. And that is how they are able to be successful. It is not, them winning an election or any of the other things. It is getting you to go along with what they're doing or to take part. And both of those things are very, very valuable. That's why also it's important to remember that far right success isn't how well they do in the election. It's how much their ideas are spreading and becoming normalized in society. That is why things like the incredibly right-wing turn on migration and effectively like the slow elimination of the international asylum system that we're seeing all over. I mean, these are really radical things, like really, really radical things. I think because it's been going on for many years for us now, we don't realize like how unassailable things like the asylum system used to be, right? It was like touted as like a big international achievement. Now it's being dismantled and being used as like a major political tool to like kind of bash each other with. This is not normal, or not normal as in like this isn't how things were when we thought things were normal. So I've lost my train of thought, to be totally honest.
I just want to quickly correct myself. I did say that 1/3 of the government was at the conference. It's 1/3 of the Likud party elected officials from the Knesset, not the government. So I do want to correct myself there. I've also had a message from my producer. The Financial Times reported in the last few hours that a confidential report they obtained found that the IDF may have used white phosphorus on peacekeepers. So that is just one report. I mean, I guess it's not surprising that Israel has once again broken international law, but this is against peacekeepers, not innocent Palestinians. So it's, I mean, they're out of control. I just want to get back to sort of the early part of the question. Look, I want to make it clear that there are many Israelis in Israel who are disgusted about what's happening in Gaza. They're protesting them. They're often getting beaten up by the state police. So there are many people who are against this. But there has been polling that showed that the majority of people either support what the government's doing in terms of it's about right in their response, or it could go further. So whether it's majority, whether it's a minority or a significant portion, I mean, what could you tell me, apart from, I guess, being pushed into the IDF at a young age, what could you tell me about the culture within society in Israel that makes this more or less mainstream in a sense that, again, might not be a majority, but it's a healthy opinion people have over that? I mean, look, I remember watching a video a few years ago with journalist Abby Martin. She went over to Israel. She interviewed random people on the street, and they were saying very similar things to those at the conference. So what do you think that does drive this? I mean, did it start with fear? I mean, we know that the Israeli state has decided that Jewish people are always facing an existential threats, and Israel's the only safe place for them. And if that's the case, what turns it from fear into rage and anger? I mean, do you think it's that, or maybe something entirely different?
I think it has a lot to do with that if everywhere has had a very right-wing turn because of like social media, blah, 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 they were way further along that path before any of that started. So I think we have to think like this is a heavily militarized society. This is one that is having periodic wars with its neighbors, and internally. This is a very, very volatile situation. It is a situation where you have a state government that has been governed by, unfortunately, Bibi Netanyahu quite a long time, apart from a couple of breaks. Um, so you got a few things, right? So you have a very conservative society. You have a society that's also built around a state narrative of them always being under attack, this constant reason of existence, this this kind of like Hasbara culture of being inculcated into these like national myths is very, very intense. um so that's all happening. Then you have all of the kind of gasoline that social media causes this to spread out of control. Then you have a lot of foreign money going into Israel over the last, like, I would say, like 20 or so years, where you have a lot of very right-wing Christians from the US and around Europe putting in a ton of money to pump up the Israeli far right, and also the Messianic Christian movement. If you're not deep into this very strange sect, it's also known as Jews for Jesus. It's a very I could not explain this in a small amount of time. It's out there. It's a different thing. It's like the Mormonism of Judaism, the best way to explain it. So, like, this becoming central to the body politic when it was very out inside from before. And even though, so this is the thing, like, you can have all these groups all kind of on different levels supporting the occupation or some level of this for different ideological reasons. These can all be broad versions of why they can justify or not justify it. Then you have the situation, you have like a very extremist sect that has also become very powerful very quickly in Israeli politics, specifically because the Israeli right was like, we can use this. We can benefit if we're able to organize the settler movement, if we're able to harness all that money and energy, all this American cash and all blah, blah, blah. Dreams can be made. And unfortunately, Bibi Netanyahu, sitting there in Likud, who probably, if he wasn't facing jail time and a bunch of other chaos, would have never gone into like the shaky coalition he's in right now. He needed them. He needed them. And then it created a self-fulfilling prophecy where you have the extremists from the outside are deeply tied into the far right. They're getting buckets of money poured onto them from foreign sources, not just from the US. You also have a huge Russian diaspora population that had a massive amount of money poured in to do specifically anti-LGBT communications. So it's like all of these little things start adding up. You have a rise of anti-LGBT propaganda and organizations for the first time ever. You have people counter-protesting prides that were not happening in Tel Aviv until, we're talking about 10 years ago, and then it becomes an annual event. These are tied into the Israeli far right. This becomes part of the politics. And then everything, which is already very right, moves rapidly further and further and further. Yeah, I mean, and also like you got to think about all these things. Israel and Gaza also went through COVID like the rest of us. Think of what kind of politics that also cooks up. Like these are all happening there as well. And not only is there like a chaotic domestic situation, they're facing all of the international stuff that we've all gone through. So this is all a dangerous cocktail. Yeah, I mean, and also like you don't have
No, yeah. Go on, no,
because
go ahead,
it's so normalized to have some sort of agreement with occupation or the way the government is set up. Not even if you like Netanyahu or whatever. Like, I mean, how Israel is structured currently in the broadest sense. If you agree with that, there is not a lot of other options to go along. There is not an electoral party that's strong enough. The Israeli left was wiped out a long time before this was kicking off. Like before Netanyahu's situation collapsed a bit with Likud, he was very dominant in the Knesset, and like these parties have become very dominant. So like there's just not much there to be able to create this strong counter pull in another direction. Yeah, and the permanent crisis, and that's it. Like Likud has kept everything in a permanent crisis. If it wasn't war, it was the economy. If it wasn't the economy, it was war. And yeah, it's pretty bad.
Now, I have had words from my producer again about some news. It's not to do with Gaza, it's to do with Donald Trump, actually. Donald Trump has filed a Federal Election Commission complaint against far-left Labour helping the Kamala Harris campaign for illegal foreign campaign contributions and interference in our elections. We have a statement when representatives of the British government previously sought to go door-to-door in America, it did not end well for them. The Trump-Vance campaign has filed a Federal Election Commission complaint against the Harris-Walz campaign and the Labour Party of the United Kingdom for illegal foreign campaign contributions and interference in our elections. I do want to say, though, there seems to be
This
no
is not
issue
illegal,
with
by the
Elon
way.
Musk. Well, that's the thing. I was going to say it's not illegal for a handful of campaigners cross borders and
Yeah,
some
can
door
I
knocking.
speak on this?
Elon
Because
Musk is giving money. I definitely want your response to this as well, but people need to know that Elon Musk is giving money to his political action committee, the Super PAC, America PAC.
Yeah,
is
America
supposed to
PAC.
work simultaneously with the Trump campaign, but he's actually inserted himself in the Trump campaign. That's definitely against the rules. But I know you want to say something about it, so please give me a response to that.
So it is not illegal for individuals to go and campaign. It's also not even illegal for people from political parties to go campaign for other political parties in the US. I have led a lot of international delegations to do campaigning in a whole bunch of different countries. This is a normal part of political parties sending activists to other elections so that they can learn how to do elections better. And going to the US, and I can tell you because I've worked in a lot of countries on a lot of elections, it's on another level. These activists are going to be hitting the hardest campaign they've ever done in their life. I am constantly telling young activists, if you really want to learn how to properly campaign, you got to go do one of the US ones. So like that's like one thing. You can have your feelings about labor or whatever, but I think it's irrelevant in this situation because Labor Party people have been going to the US to do campaigning there individually or in small groups for like ages. I know a bunch of people who went over there to do Bernie Sanders stuff and also do stuff with like Elizabeth Warren. So there's that. The other thing is like the day that this story broke in the US as like a drama, Nigel Farage went and spoke at a Trump rally. So like these things are so absurd. It's deeply frustrating, but like this is what Trump's trying to do. He's trying to create the mythology that the election is stolen. He's been doing this for months. This is just another, card in the deck that he's putting. It sounds good if you don't look into it, if you don't think about it. Most people aren't involved in party politics. They don't think that this is like a normal thing, even though it's been around forever. I think it'll be quite effective. I also think I was a bit frustrated that people who didn't know this was a thing, like even journalists, were talking about it like it was illegal, or presenting it that it was like organized by the Labor Party. It wasn't. It was done by like one party, like the head of operation. I made a TikTok about this because I was quite frustrated. I think also the much more important thing out of this, do not view this as the situation at hand. View this as an attack on international organizing. That is what it is. The right, the Trump campaign, very tied into the international far right. Viktor Orban, conservative, National Conservative Conference, CPAC, all this shit. Like they are internationally organizing. They only want to make it illegal when the left in their mind does it. That is the problem. It's cool when they do it in base. It's evil and illegal when the other side does it. That is the real crux of the situation. And if you really want to think about, as a progressive, as a left-wing person, you will need to be doing international organizing if you hope to tackle the problems of capitalism. If you're doing environmental organizing, you're well-versed in doing transnational organizing already, or trade unionism, whatever. This is what the real game is. Like that's the reason for this particular thing, because they have a Supreme Court that will rule in their favor. This goes through the federal court system. They can just make the constitutionality of this. They can just choose the ruling. Like, and that is the danger here. This is the danger of the Trump presidency, guys. Like, he can just throw something into the courts. He owns the Supreme Court. They do the thing he wants them to do. And this is the thing he's going to get them to do. He's going to get them to rule. It is illegal for foreign people. And keep in mind, it's because they're foreign, which means people who are legally in America are also on the chopping block for this. And there are tens of millions of those people who are also probably campaigning and organizing for Kamala. Like that is just a normal thing as well. People will go and do work on campaigns before they're citizens. So like this is the game. It's about foreigners bad, foreigners get elections. This is the real thing. The Democrats are actually doing the foreign interference. Don't look at our thing with Russia. Don't talk about that thing. This is the only thing that's happening. Just look at the thing in front of you. And it's like, I think it's a lot more dangerous than people are giving it credit for. Like, this is a very clever attack. And they've turned a non-existent issue into like national, international news. Like
I mean, it's a trick they often do, isn't it? Even when we talk about the Haitian lie, they're eating cats, they're eating dogs, and it was one person I think called up, made a false story about it, and it made it to prominence because the far right emboldened it, the Trump campaign emboldened it, and this is another one. It's not a big issue. This is completely legal, as you rightly said, but of course, this is a clever way to attack everything else, as you've rightly pointed out. I have to say though, this is all we have time for. I mean, we knew we were going to do 3 stories, but we managed to sneakily get a 4th one in there last minute. But thank you so much for watching our extra long show, but it is all we have time for. I want to thank Rota for being an amazing guest, and we will 100% have you on more frequently in the future. Remember, if you haven't already, please like this video, which helps the algorithm, and also hit the subscribe button. Now, this channel has been going for 4 years. The first 3 was just myself using old broken equipment. And in the last year, growth has been significant. We've had several interviews, including with Jeremy Corbyn, not once but twice. And now we have 5 of us working behind Turn Left. But we face such an uphill battle. If you're on the right, you're playing it on easy mode. But with the left, the algorithm isn't often on your side, and we have no big money backers. We really want Turn Left to turn into something big, where all of us who are currently navigating this, round our full-time work, the goal is for this to become our paid jobs, to have a proper studio, to have even more people involved, and to become a force, not just from the left, but within the entire media landscape. We've got some big goals here. It will also help improve our current structure, where we don't need to cancel shows due to not having people available, or moving shows from our regular slots, as we did today, because we don't usually go live on a Tuesday. You can help with that. And if you are able to, then you can support us with donations, either monthly or one-off. To do that, go over to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support, and there you will have the option to become a monthly member through Patreon or the website Coffee for any one-offs. Thank you so much, everyone. We will be back tomorrow at 7:30 p.m. I'm Curtis Daly, and I'll see you next time.
Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn Left.